A town kneels under a crooked brand, and a name spoken in whispers, the Masked Rider. I ride a black horse through dust and trouble, where the law has gone thin and fear grows thick. Tonight, Copper Bend calls. A widow is threatened. A gang owns the streets. I won't let it stand. This is the Masked Rider, a classic Western tale of justice, courage, and a vow kept beneath a black hat. Subscribe, drop a like, leave a comment, and keep the lantern lit so you don't miss the next chapter. I came to Copper Bend at the hour when light turns honest men homeward and sets wolves on the road. My horse, Midnight, carried me in quiet, his coat black as a creek at midnight and his breath steady as a drum. The town had a leaning look to it, like the wind had been pushing on the buildings for years and they'd learned to give a little rather than break. Signs squeaked. A stray dog crossed with his tail tucked. Somewhere, a piano tried a tune and lost its nerve. I kept my brim low and my mask snug. The cloth is plain, no fancy stitching, just a strip to keep my face from becoming another man's trophy. Folks believe a mask adds mystery. For me, it just holds a vow in place. I am not the law, but I ride for it. I am not the judge, but I'll stand between harm and the harmless. A stable hand came out as we reached the livery. He couldn't have been more than 12, freckles pooled under dust, eyes quick and worried. "You ain't from round here," he said, which was a truth and a warning both. "No," I told him, "and I won't be long." He took Midnight's reins like they were the reins of his own heartbeat. "Careful where you walk," he said, trying to be casual and failing. "Briggs' outfit runs the boardwalk this week. Sheriff Harlan's got a badge, but no men to pin him on." "Briggs," I said. "How many?" "More than you." He glanced at my mask and then down at his shoes. "More than the sheriff, too." "Names matter," I said. "Who's hurt by them?" He swallowed. "Mrs. Eliza Kane, widow, runs the Telegraph. Briggs wants her deed, says her late husband owed him. Sheriff told Briggs to bring papers. He brought fists." I nodded once. "Feed my horse and give him water. If I don't come back, let him out before sunrise. He knows his way." The boy blinked, then nodded with the gravity of an oath. I left the livery and walked toward the lamp glow of the main street. Copper Bend wasn't big, but it had the things a man could twist: a bank, a freight office, a saloon, a church with a bell that had more rust than ring to it, and a telegraph shack with a window lit like a brave eye. 3 of Briggs's men were framed in that window like stains on a clean shirt. 2 stood inside. 1 leaned on the doorframe, a match hanging unlit from his lip. He saw me and smiled the way a wolf smiles, slow and without joy. "Evening, preacher," he said to my hat and mask. "You got a sermon for sinners?" "Just a prayer," I said. "Leave the widow be." "That a prayer?" He laughed and flicked the match to the ground. "Sounds like a fool's wish." I stood still until I wasn't anymore. The man didn't see me move, not properly, because he didn't expect to be moved. My left hand found his wrist, my right hand found the gun he was thinking about, my boot found his knee. He hit the dirt, having learned 3 new things about balance. He reached for the gun that wasn't there. I dropped it into a water trough. "Be sure," I told him, "that what you take from good folks doesn't come back heavier." Inside, the 2 men had their hats pulled low and their voices pulled high. Mrs. Kane was behind the counter, holding herself upright by propriety alone. She had a cut on her lip and a look on her face that was not fear so much as weariness at having to face it again. When I opened the door, the men turned like a single idea. "Mask," one said as if it were a crime on its own. "You lost." "I'm exactly where I meant to be," I said. "This lady will not sign anything tonight." They grinned at each other. "That so?" The one on the left drew. I didn't. I kicked the counter, sent the ledger up like a hinged trap, and his shot went into the ceiling. I stepped in close and learned his jaw the language of my fist. The other tried to come around the desk with a knife. He discovered that a knife is a hard thing to hang on to when a man grabs your hand and lets your elbow argue with the edge of the table. He yelled. I took his blade and buried it in the wood by his belt buckle just to give him something to think about. Mrs. Kane pressed a handkerchief to her lip. "Sir," she said, formal even now, "who are you?" "Someone who won't let men like this choose your story," I said. "Do you have a deputy telegraph key?" She nodded once, eyes sharp despite the blood. "In the drawer. Send word to Dodge Trace. Ask for Marshal Owens. Tell him Copper Bend needs paper, iron, and men." I tied the 2 outlaws with telegraph wire and pushed them toward the door. The third one outside had crawled to his feet and found his pride. He left it there when he saw his friends trussed like Christmas hams. The sheriff came around the corner then. Old coat, older eyes, badge that had been polished to the bone. He had a scattergun broken across his arm, the kind of posture a man keeps when he's tired of his own weakness. "Evening," I said. He looked at me, and if he was startled by the mask, he buried it quick. "Name's Abel Harlan," he said. "I was sheriff once. Now I'm only called that out of habit." "You'll need to be called it in truth before sunrise," I said. "Briggs won't enjoy this song." He glanced at the bound men and nodded like someone accepting a bill of sale he didn't want. "Caleb Briggs is a bully with a payroll. He's got a dozen regular hands and a few meaner ones who come and go. Took most of my deputies by buying their hearts. Took the rest by breaking their bones. What does he want with Mrs. Kane?" "Same thing he wants with everybody," Harlan said. "To stand taller by putting them in the ground. But there's money too. Telegraph gives him eyes. The freight office gives him teeth. Bank gives him a stomach. Where is he now?" "The saloon," Harlan said. "Where victory is easy, because the cards are his." "I'll go say grace." Harlan laughed once, a dry bark that had no moisture in it. "You a preacher?" "No," I said. "I just speak when I must." The saloon's piano remembered the tune it had lost earlier, and was playing it like a man who'd had his drink paid for. Big lamps hung from the ceiling and showed a room full of men pretending they weren't afraid of the light. In the corner, a girl with flowers on her dress poured whiskey with hands that wished they were elsewhere. At the biggest table sat Caleb Briggs. He was not large, but he had made himself that way by standing in places where he couldn't be ignored. His suit was black and the same kind of expensive as a coffin. He wore a revolver low on his right hip and confidence even lower. There was a scar on his cheek that cut through his smile and turned it into something you could hang a hat on. He saw me and grinned. "Now this is a happening," he said. "A man who hides his face has come to show his courage." "I hide nothing," I said, moving closer. "I just don't give trophies." He tapped the edge of his glass. "Do you know what Copper Bend is?" He asked the room, not me. "It's a bend. The river runs as it likes, and the land must accept it. Some men think the river is wrong. I think we should build our houses on the inside of the bend and enjoy the silt." "You're a poet," I said. "Shame about the meter, it sounds like theft." The room laughed because it needed to. Briggs let them. Then he stood, slow, because he wanted the moment to grow. "You put your hands on my boys," he said softly. "They were taking something that wasn't theirs." He tilted his head. "And you think it is yours to stop them?" "No," I said. "It's everyone's." He smiled like a cat taught to smile. "I like your horse," he said. "Black, loyal. If you leave tonight, I'll keep him as a memory and let you keep your bones. If you stay, I'll swap the arrangement." "Sometimes a man has to choose who he is in a minute," I said. "I chose long ago. I stay." He looked at my mask as if it were a fly buzzing him. "Boys," he said without taking his eyes off me, "escort this traveler to the street and teach him the local language." 4 men rose. I didn't move until I did. The first came too fast. I let his speed belong to him while my shoulder belonged to me, and his ribs learned the distance between. The second swung the butt of his pistol. I let it pass and answered with a palm to his nose that rang in his head like church on Sunday. The third needed persuading and found it when his ankle met my boot. The fourth reconsidered the notion of choices and sat down with the dignity of a man who never meant to stand. Briggs clapped, slow. "You're better than most," he said. "That makes you worse. I'm just a man who won't be owned." "That's cute," he said, and tipped his glass. Then he tossed it upward. The shot he fired blew it into glitter. He didn't aim at me. He didn't need to. The trick wasn't for me. It was for the room, to remind it where heat comes from. "Tell Sheriff Harlan," he said, "that Copper Bend bends. The river will run how I please. And tell the widow I'll collect what's owed. If not in ink, then in ashes." I didn't draw, not because I doubted my hand, because a crowded saloon is a poor place for a lesson. The stray bullets always mark the wrong students. I turned and walked back out. The air tasted better. On the boardwalk, the stable hand had found me. "They took the school ledger," he said, breathless. "Names of all the kids and their families, men with red kerchiefs, headed south." "Briggs likes lists," I said. "Lists turn people into cattle." "They grabbed Miss Turner too," he added miserably. "Said they'd keep her safe so nobody did something rash." I looked at the telegraph shack. It was dark now, the single brave light gone. Sheriff Harlan appeared beside me like he'd grown there. "He wants you to charge in," he said. "He can count, and he figures you can't." "I can count," I said. "I just don't worship math." Harlan rubbed his jaw. "What do you worship, Mask?" "Promises." We gathered what we could. The blacksmith, an old veteran with a limp and a hammer, he called Mercy. The bartender, who knew every man's measure. 3 ranch hands who had lost more than they could afford. Mrs. Kane refused to go home and instead found bandages and poured whiskey on wounds and courage into cups. I took a map from the freight office and a lantern from the church. The bell didn't ring, but I put a hand on it and the iron felt patient. Bells wait for moments, men make them. We rode before midnight, 5 in number, counting the lantern as a kind of soul. The stable hand begged to come and I told him no. He cried without noise, which is the worst kind. I gave him my spare bandana and told him to give it to Sheriff Harlan if I did not return. The sheriff would know what would come next. Harlan met my eyes and nodded once. He had made his peace with failure long ago. He looked like a man trying on a new coat called Hope and not sure if it fit. The trail south cut through a mesquite flat and then rose toward Blackwater Ridge. The moon wore a thin smile. Coyotes practiced their sermon. We rode 2 by 2. Midnight never broke stride. I whispered to him, and he flicked an ear to let me know he heard. There's more in a horse than some men have in them. At the ridge we found signs, wheel ruts, cigarette butts. Don't let anyone tell you evil is careful. It leaves tracks because it thinks the land belongs to it. We doused the lantern and followed the road by the sky alone. Below in the cut, a campfire burned too bright. 2 figures by the flames, a third shadow beyond, pacing. I raised my hand and the men behind me stopped like the reins were tied to my bones. "Hold," I said. "I'll go close." "Alone?" the blacksmith hissed. "Alone is faster," I said. "And if I fail, noise won't add talent." I moved down through scrub and stone until I could smell coffee and hear the quiet way men argue when they're tired of their own voices. One man talked about cards, the other talked about money. Neither mentioned the schoolteacher. That made me colder than the night. I thought about Miss Turner and about lists that make it easier to hurt folks. I thought about the boy at the livery and Mrs. Kane's cut lip. I thought about the way Briggs had shot a glass to scare the room instead of me, because scaring a room is the business he's in. I showed myself without flourish. "Evening," I said. They went for their guns like their hands were trained by fear. I cut the distance and made it short. One hit the ground with a grunt, the other found sleep the quick way. The third in the shadows tried to make himself legend by firing blind. He put a hole in the night and then in his own foot when he stumbled. I took his rifle and his nerve in an even swap. "Where are the ledgers?" I asked, my voice low enough not to wake the stars. "Wagon," he said through clenched teeth. "Up the draw." "With Miss Turner." "Guarded?" He nodded. "2. By who?" "Cutter and Hale." I knew the names, men who'd tied their self-worth to the weight of other men's fear. I tied the 3 with their own belts and led them aside. My men came down the slope like a careful wind. I pointed. They understood. Then I went ahead again. Up the draw, the wagon sat like a dark thought. A horse shifted in the traces. A woman's voice, soft, said something I couldn't make out and then stopped like it had been stepped on. I moved the last feet on my belly and saw the shape of a man by the wheel, boots up, hat over his eyes, trying to borrow sleep from a night that charged interest. Another shape leaned against a rock, rifle cradled, trying to look awake for the same accounting. I stood when the wind stood. The man by the wheel woke to my hand on his collar and the knowledge that he should have stayed a farmer. The other got a hush and the sight of his own rifle in my grip. "Miss Turner," I whispered. "I'm here," she whispered back. Her voice sounded like a desk full of chalk and courage. "We're going home," I said, setting my knife to the rope on her wrists. "Briggs," she began. "I know." We loaded the ledger under a blanket. We swapped the wagon horse with one of ours, fresh and less likely to argue. We started down the wash slow, the wheels telling the rocks a secret. For a minute, the world held its breath, then the world exhaled in gunfire. A shot took the lantern from the blacksmith's hand and turned it into sparks. Another knocked the hat from my head. Voices poured from the ridge like water from a broken tank. Not Cutter and Hale alone. Half a dozen at least, their boots in the gravel and their pride in their throats. "Go!" I shouted and hit the wagon's flank. The horse lunged. Miss Turner grabbed the reins like a thunder lesson. The blacksmith swung mercy and taught a lesson of his own. I turned to face the noise. Midnight was under me because he always is when I need him, even when I don't remember climbing. We moved like we were one creature. The first rider coming down the slope saw a black shape and a gloved fist and learned the frontier word for sleep. The second tried for my shoulder. He met my elbow instead. The third was careful and took his time. I took his time with mine, which was shorter and sharper. We didn't have to win. We only had to get free. Freedom is sometimes a ridgeline and sometimes a breath. That night it was a bend in the wash, where the wagon could vanish, and a man could turn and promise a room full of shadows that he would see them again in better light. We made that bend. We made it hurt. We made it count. By the time the moon had slid behind a cloud like a shy girl, we were riding back toward Copper Bend with Miss Turner in the wagon, the ledger under a blanket, and the knowledge that Briggs had been refused once. Refusals have echoes. The town would hear this one and choose what to do with it. At the edge of town, the church bell decided to find its ring again. Harlan stood beneath it, a scattergun across his arm, eyes wider than they'd been earlier by a good yard. "Mrs." Kane ran to us and reached for Miss Turner like a sister reaches. The stable hand smiled with his whole face and tried not to show it. I swung down and put my hand on Midnight's neck. He snorted and looked at me like I was too slow to learn the simple lesson. "Keep moving." "Tomorrow," Harlan said, voice rough. "Tomorrow Briggs will gather." "Tomorrow," I said, "we'll stand." He looked at my mask and I looked past him at the town. Copper Bend had more light in it than when I came. Not enough. More. I could work with more. I slept in the livery with Midnight's warmth at my shoulder and the smell of hay in my throat. Before I closed my eyes, I tied the mask to a nail beside me. A reminder, not of who I am, of who I must be when dawn lifts its hand. Dawn comes. Men choose.
I came in on a black horse, dust on my tongue. A town bent like a willow under Briggs's gun. A widow at the wire, a school book torn. I swore on the wind I'd mend what was worn. I ride, midnight ride, through the fear and the fire. Lantern in my chest, set the dark on wire. I won't be on and I won't step aside, just as on the saddle ride, midnight ride. Sheriff's badge was tired, church bell dry. Cards stacked in the saloon, truth told a lie. I spoke with my knuckles where words came late. Took the ledger from the night and handed it to fate. Oh, ride, midnight ride, through the fear and the fire. Lantern in my chest, set the dark on 'em wide. I won't be owned and I won't step aside. Justice on the saddle, ride, midnight ride. They shot at the moon just to hear it rain. But a mask ain't a secret, it's a promised thing. For the widow, for the children, for a sheriff's stand. I'll draw every line a good man can. If the river bends to a bully's hand, then we'll move the banks, we'll raise this land. Let the cowards count, I'll count what's right. One town, one vow, one lamp light. Ride, ride, midnight ride, through the fear and the fire. Lantern in my chest, set the dark on a wire. I won't be owned and I won't step aside. Keep the lantern lit, ride, midnight ride.
The night I returned with Miss Turner and the ledger, Copper Bend slept like a wounded man, shallow, restless, waiting for dawn to stitch or to tear. I didn't sleep much either. When the rooster crowed, it sounded more like a warning than a song. Sheriff Harlan met me outside the telegraph shack. His badge caught the first light, and for once it looked like a star instead of a coin. "Briggs will come before noon," he said. "He doesn't like to let fear grow. He likes to harvest it quick." "He'll come," I said, fastening the mask, "but so will we." We had no army, just townsfolk with calloused hands and hearts that had been owned too long. The blacksmith with his hammer, the bartender with a shotgun kept under the counter, ranch hands with ropes and grit, women who passed water and bandages as if they were bullets. Even the stable boy carried a slingshot, though his hands shook with the weight of it. We made barricades out of wagons. We poured sand across the boardwalk to keep footing steady. I rode midnight down the main street at dawn, so every door saw him. The people needed a figure to believe in. It didn't matter that I was only a man. Belief doesn't ask for truth, it asks for fire. The sun hadn't reached the steeple when dust rose from the South Road, riders, a dozen or more. At their head, Caleb Briggs, black coat gleaming, scar catching the sun like a crooked badge. His men fanned out, rifles resting casual on their saddles. They looked at the town like a butcher looks at cattle, choosing cuts. Briggs reined up in front of the saloon where his throne usually sat. Today he stayed in the saddle. "Sheriff," he called, "you've got my property." Harlan stepped forward, scattergun leveled. His voice was steady, though I could see his knees bend with age. "You've got no claim here, Briggs. The telegraph deed is Kane's. The school's ledger belongs to the children. And Miss Turner ain't for sale. Briggs smiled as if the words were a good joke. You got brave overnight, old man. Brave's a coat. It don't last through winter. I'll count to 3, and if my ledger and my girl ain't in my hands, I'll burn this town flat. He raised a finger. I nudged Midnight forward, mask catching the sun. Briggs, I said, voice carrying down the street. You're not counting to 3. You're counting the days you've stolen, and they're done. The townsfolk stirred behind me. Briggs's men tightened their grips. His grin flickered, but only for a breath. Mask, he said, you're a story, not a man, and stories end. He jerked his hand. Gunfire cracked the morning open. We were ready. The barricades held, rifles barked from windows, and smoke rose like a new storm. I rode straight at Briggs. Midnight thundered, hooves hammering defiance into the dust. My revolver spoke twice. 2 riders fell, one screaming, one silent. Briggs wheeled his horse, firing wild, his bullets singing through the air like wasps. The fight was dust and noise, steel and will. Men fell, some crawled away, others stood taller than they ever thought they could. The bartender blasted a rider clean off his saddle. The blacksmith swung mercy until his arm bled. Sheriff Harlan dropped 2 with his scattergun before a bullet tore his shoulder, but he stood, teeth gritted, blood soaking his sleeve. Briggs and I found each other in the chaos. His pistol and my revolver spoke at the same time. My shot cut his hat in half. His grazed my ribs. We circled, horses snorting, eyes locked. He sneered, "Take off the mask, boy, and die with your own face." I holstered my gun. His eyes widened at the insult. Then I leapt from Midnight, tackled him clean off his horse, and we hit the dirt like a storm breaking. His fist found my jaw. Mine found his scar. We wrestled in the street, townsfolk screaming, guns still roaring behind us. He pulled a knife, fast as venom. I caught his wrist, felt the blade's edge kiss my glove. "You think you can stop the river?" he snarled. "I don't stop rivers," I said, twisting his arm until the knife clattered. "I build bridges." I drove my fist into his temple. His body went slack. The street went quiet. Briggs lay beaten in the dust, mask staring down at him. His men saw their leader fall and broke like spooked cattle. Those who ran were chased out. Those who dropped their guns were bound. The town stood. Smoke drifted, bodies groaned, but Copper Bend was still Copper Bend. Sheriff Harlan pressed his good hand against my shoulder. "The river won't bend to him again," he said. Mrs. Kane held Miss Turner close. The stable boy cheered with a cracked voice. Midnight tossed his mane, as if to say it was nothing new. I looked down at Briggs, bloodied and unconscious, and felt no triumph, only duty done. "Stories don't end," I said to the townsfolk. "They ride on the wind, reminding us who we can be." The people of Copper Bend lifted their heads a little higher that day, and though I left by dusk, the mask hanging firm, I knew the lantern I lit in their hearts would keep burning long after my shadow left their street.
He came with a scar and a crooked smile. Thought the town would bow, thought fear would beguile. But the widow stood and the children prayed, and a masked man rode where no law had stayed. Keep the lantern lit, let it shine through the dust. Raise your head high, put your hope in the just. The river may bend, but the rock will resist. Keep the lantern lit and remember this. The black horse thundered, the street caught flame. Justice wore no badge, only one lone name. fists and fire, blood on the sand. A mask was a promise, not the face of a man. Keep the lantern lit, let it shine through the dust. Raise your head high, put your hope in the just. The river may bend, but the rock will resist. Keep the lantern lit and remember this. When the dawn comes cold and the fear returns, when the wheel of fortune still twists and turns, listen for the hoofbeats, steady and strong. The masked rider's vow will carry you along. Keep the lantern lit, let it shine through the dust. Raise your head high, put your hope in the just. The river may bend, but the rock will resist. Keep the lantern lit and remember this. Keep the lantern lit, oh, let it shine through the dust. Raise your head high, oh, put your hope in the just. The river may bend, but the rock will resist. Keep the lantern lit and remember this.
Justice doesn't wear a badge alone. Sometimes it rides a black horse, hidden by a mask, and leaves behind nothing but hope and dust. Copper Bend stood tall because good folks chose not to bend. That's the tale of the masked rider. But the wind carries more stories, and the trail never ends. If this ride spoke to you, subscribe to Dust and Ballads, leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and keep the lantern lit for the next Western story with original music. And don't miss the full soundtrack playlist with every ballad and instrumental written for this tale.